Can the Utah Utes avoid the upset up in Laramie? We're breaking down Utah versus Wyoming on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first view and listen of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If it's your first time tuning into this show, make sure you like and subscribe. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel. How great is it to have college football back, and you can head over to FanDuel Sportsbook today and get in on the action. The FanDuel app, download it and start planning your future bets right now. Today's episode is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel. My name is JT Wistrcill, and I'm excited to be previewing Utah versus Wyoming with JY, who's a co-host of the Big Mountain podcast. JY, let's just get right into this. We appreciate you jumping on. Does Wyoming have a chance to get an upset against a top 20 Utah team? How do you view this Wyoming team right now?
I think anybody has a chance. We saw what USF has done here to start the season, and Wyoming's coming in 2-0. So do they have a great chance? No. I'm not going to, pretend that they do. Very difficult game. You mentioned Utah top 20. Coach Savell here said he has them as top 10 in the nation right now, and I would agree with him. My co-host Steve thinks this team, the Utah Utes, are formidable, a very strong team here. So going to be real tough there, but they are at home in Laramie. That can always cause some issues there, especially for those that don't have the altitude. There's always a shot.
You mentioned the Laramie aspect of this. What is it like? How would you describe that atmosphere that Utah is going to walk into?
Yeah, well, 7220 there, the highest altitude that you can get into. I heard some of the players with Wyoming kind of talk about that, kind of the difference playing in Laramie versus where they play most of their games, right, at home, or half of their games, and then they're able to travel to other stadiums that aren't as high, and just kind of the change that they feel. And so a lot of the teams that come into Laramie kind of have the opposite of that. But I think these days, especially with these huge programs like the Utes, these guys are top notch shape and ready for this type of stuff. So will they win maybe a little bit quicker? Maybe, but I think they bounce right back. It is a tough pace to play. You can get some wins up there. This is September, so we're not into winter yet. That obviously changes things as well with weather. But I'll tell you, for the fans there, Wyoming is the state of Wyoming's team. The whole state is cheering for this one team. They show up there at War Memorial. And it's not an easy place to play. You talk to anybody, especially in the Mountain West, they're going to tell you this is the one spot that we fear going to every year. And even UNLV, we did a UNLV pod earlier on. I had him on, and they're starting 3-0. He says, the one game that I'm worried about the most, it wasn't the Boise game, it was the Laramie game up there with Wyoming. So it definitely can cause havoc for some teams.
It can, and that's where Utah's that advantage too, being Salt Lake City, the altitude up there as well. But that'll be something that's always interesting to see, just going outside your state. How does it fare? I will ask you really quick: how has Utah State fared in the past in Laramie? Just like, have they gotten winded? Have they looked fine? How would you say?
They do fine. They do fine. It's more, I think you see it more out of conference with some of the teams there up in Laramie, and definitely later in the season in Laramie with the temperature conditions and things that they can get up there. I think that's where you see it a little bit more than maybe you'll see it here in a September game. But, they played Texas Tech just a few years ago. I don't think Texas Tech was ready for Laramie. They upset Texas Tech in that game. So, I think the Utes are a little bit different here. That they're coming from the mountain time zone and area. Like, they're not a Texas team and California teams that are down like in the valley or something. So I don't anticipate the Utes struggling too much with it.
What can you tell us about this Wyoming team specifically? You are 2-0, surprised. I think a lot of us were surprised to see the Akron score be as close as it was, just with how the Zips have fared in the past, take care of business against an FCS team. But what are your thoughts on this Wyoming team specifically?
So far this year, of course, 2-0. Anybody would love to be 2-0. It doesn't matter how you do it. You'd rather have, as Jay Sawvell said after that Akron game, I'd rather have an ugly win than a pretty loss, and that absolutely what it was. And I wouldn't say that was an ugly win. I was at that game. And over the two games that they had, so they had Akron there in week 1, University of Northern Iowa in week 2, they've doubled up in terms of yards. Wyoming's over 800 yards total in those 2 games. Akron, UNI together, under 400 yards in those 2 games. So when you actually watch the game and see how things play out, the Cowboys controlled both of those games. That 10-0 does look awkward. I mean, anybody would be like, wow, they only beat Akron 10-0, not to, talk bad about the Zips, but they're not as a FBS power. But they absolutely left points on the field there, did the Cowboys. I mean, easily could have been a 21-0, 28-0 type of game. And they defensively, they absolutely controlled that game, and they did against UNI as well. Now, Devin Dampier here with Utah is a totally different quarterback than the 2 quarterbacks they would have seen here early in the season. But I will say, I think there's not much more any fan could hope from the Cowboys to start 2-0. They handled the games really, really well. Last year's start, we all want to forget about that, but it went downhill, almost from the first snap of the season till the end, until a nice win versus Washington State there. They kind of got some things going again. But, when you look at that a year ago to where they are today, the defense has done really well so far. They've gotten some turnovers. I really like this linebacker core that they have brought in. This Braden Johnson kid is a stud. So I just like everything about this team. They're not a 12-0 team. They're not a 10-2 team, but they're a solid Wyoming Cowboy team, what you've kind of been used to here, previous to this last year.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I was surprised to see finish 10th in the Mountain West, 2-5 in conference play, 3-9 overall, even if you do get the win against the Washington State Cougars. That's something there. But like you said, I was just surprised by that. How much better is this team from last year's team, in your opinion? And where have they made the biggest strides outside of some of the places you've mentioned already?
Well, let's start on offense. I mean, they have a new quarterback here, Evan Svoboda. I highly touted. I had tons of hopes going into last year with Evan. We saw flashes of what he could do the year prior, and some of the time that he was in there. It just didn't work out. I'm not going to talk about why. It just didn't work out for him. It didn't work out for the team. Again, they had just a horrible start, and it snowballed from there for both him and the team in general. So Kaden Anderson here, Texas quarterback kid. He started playing towards the end of last season. You could kind of see his upside, what his potential was there. I will say, I thought the Akron game, and he even said it, it wasn't up to his par. He would have expected a little bit more from himself. But, that's a big change for this Cowboys team. We have a new guy under center. Evan Svoboda is still on the team. He actually switched over to be a tight end. So he's still with the Cowboys. But back up there to John Michael Gillenborg at tight end. So that's a big change. Offensive line as well has just stepped up a notch. They're returning guys, but the interior 3, they have their own podcast called Fat, Fatter, Fattest. And it's a great listen if anybody wants to hear like 3 interior linemen just talk about, football and the day and what it's like in collegiate athletics. Cool podcast. But they've really taken it upon themselves to help be the leaders of this offense. And it's the strength of the offense. That O-line is giving the protection to Anderson, is putting some holes here for Sam Scott and others. And the other big thing on the offensive line, like I have to talk about J. Mike, to me, the best tight end in the Mountain West, one of the best tight ends in the nation. Having him come back, he had P4 offers. Of course, we know with the transfer portal and money being thrown around, there were offers there for him. He stays home here at Wyoming, so I have to give massive shout-outs to him. But Chris Durr, a young sophomore wide receiver, we saw some of his talent last year, and he has just exploded onto the scene here this year. He's had touchdowns in both games, very fast, not a big kid. He's a shorter guy, but very, very speedy. They want to get him the ball. He's a big part of their game plan. So that's kind of the offensive side. Defensive side, as I said, the linebackers to me, pretty disappointing last year. I love to see this linebacker play already here early on in this season. I like, kind of some of the issues that they had last year. They both have brought guys up here within the Cowboy ranks, also brought in some transfers to help kind of plug some holes in that. The D-line's solid. The secondary is still my biggest question. In the offensive that we have played, really haven't tested secondaries too much. So I'm still kind of waiting to see what happens here with our secondary as we play, the likes of Utah. Week 4, we play Colorado. So, I'll get a better feel for the secondary. I'd say I'm still kind of making up my mind on where our secondary is. I can tell you, Coach is really high on our corners, but I kind of want to see a little bit more out of them before, I'm able to comment too much on them.
That's Wyoming. If you're listening to this show, you know Utah. So what are the key matchups in this game? We're diving into it in one moment. Today's show also brought to you by our friends DoorDash. With DoorDash, are you just kicking your feet up on game day and don't really want to head out? That's where you need to get some DoorDash. And it's time to look back and crown this week's MVP on who delivered, just like DoorDash always was. This week's MVP on who delivered is going to be, for the Utah Utes this past week, I'm going to go with Jackson Benny, who had the pick 6 in the game. He delivered in a massive way. He's been great all season, flying around, making plays, making stuff happen. I've loved watching Jackson Benny. Helped continue this pick 6 streak as well. He's an electric player and even made a catch in week 1 on offense. This performance wasn't a fluke. Benny is going to stay on a hot streak. And just like Jackson Benny delivered for the Utah Utes, you can have DoorDash delivered to your Saturdays with DoorDash streaks. You save even more if you order every Saturday. Your order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. The promo ends on November 18th, but you can head over and start your DoorDash streak today. JY back with me here of the Big Mountain Podcast. JY, I want to know, with this team, with Wyoming versus Utah, biggest keys to the game. I see it as Utah's ability to run the ball is still the biggest key. That's what they want to do. You don't want to get Devin Dampier in too many 3rd and longs, although he's still capable of making things happen. So to me, the key for Utah is running the ball, and inversely for Wyoming, it's stopping the run, something you already mentioned. How is Wyoming going to try and stop what arguably is one of the best offensive lines in college football?
Absolutely. Fantastic offensive line, and they have a very mobile quarterback. Obviously the Pokes know all about Devin Dampier here.
Talk about that.
He was with New Mexico the past couple of years. Last season's game, just, they score almost 90 points or whatever it was between the two sides. Never count this kid out. I remember week 1 last year watching Dampier in the game there with New Mexico. I'm trying to remember who they play. They played an FCS team, and it's escaping me who they played. But I went, holy cow, this kid's going to set the Mountain West on fire. Now, their defense, they struggled mightily, but I knew they were going to get points, and my goodness, they did. And it's going to be a tough task for this defense. The line, the linebackers, to not only stop the running game, but stop a really mobile quarterback in Devin Dampier. And I'm with you on that side of the ball. We're going to have to see what they can do to clog those holes and really try to push back against an offensive line that, as you said, and I agree with, one of the best in the country. Absolutely what we want to watch on that side of the ball.
It's a beastly unit for Utah up front. And, for Utah, they're still trying to work on the chemistry in the passing game. Devin Dampier has been very efficient, but Utah hasn't always connected on the explosive plays that they would like to. And this is going to be an interesting opportunity for, as you mentioned, Wyoming trying to improve their secondary. They're going against some guys. We haven't seen Justin Stevenson yet, your former receiver as well. Maybe he'll make an appearance in this game. I don't know. But so for Utah, they got Tobias Merriweather as their wide receiver 1. He's at about 40 to 30 yards in the first 2 games, each of them, but a potential big play threat type of guy, 6'5", 200 pounds. You get Ryan Davis, who was with him at New Mexico last year, so they have the good chemistry there too. Some tight ends, Dallin Bentley's really popped so far to begin the season. And then you're looking at the other guy outside, Larry Simmons, maybe Smith Snowden. Even Utah uses a corner on offense at times, Smith Snowden, this receiver, and he's been really fun to watch as well. So that'll be interesting to see. 3rd and long, I believe Utah, they will have more success passing in this game than in some of these other ones we've seen as they continue to grow and get that chemistry better. How do you feel like your cornerbacks, you've talked about a little bit now, but how are they ready to match up with the Utah wide receivers?
Well, honestly, I'm not sure for both sides. I don't know how the passing offense is going to be for Utah. You just kind of mentioned that. The Cowboys haven't gone against great passing offenses. Coach, as I said, Coach is really high on the corners. He thinks they're clearly, and not just the 2 guys, but the depth of our secondary and just depth of our whole defense. We can rotate guys in and out like we couldn't have done a year ago, which really helps, keeping guys fresh and things like that. But yeah, I don't know how they're going to, kind of match up against this Utah receiving core. I'm like I say, I'm really anxious for this game. Again, not that the first 2 games were easy, but man, this is a whole different test here for the Wyoming Cowboys.
I think we could say that about like me and covering this game, and Utah is their full attention was Wyoming, but for Utah, right? Like the thing on their mind is that top 20 matchup against Texas Tech. I think a lot of Utah fans feel that way. But it's important the fans feel that way and not the team, because if they don't and they get caught overlooking, Wyoming is not a team and a program that you want to overlook. Flipping to the other side of the ball here, I think for me, it's Utah it's trying to get you guys in those 3rd and long situations. And, as you kind of mentioned too, Kaden Anderson still growing, only a sophomore this season, already 400 passing yards overall, but does have a current QBR outside of the top 100. I don't swear that QBR is everything, but usually towards the top, towards the bottom, there's something going on there. So I do think for Utah, it is slowing down the running game. And the Utah defensive tackle room is down one of their starters, but they looked really good last week against an FCS team, so still a step up. But it's a Utah team that has a strong defensive line, and I do feel like they're going to be able to slow down the Wyoming run game. How do you see it, JY?
Yeah, I mean, Wyoming has got to be able to run the ball. There's the only way they stay in this game is if they're able to run the ball. They have to be able to, keep that offense on the field. As you said, they've got to, hopefully have short yardage for 3rd downs, because they're able to, gain some yardage on the first 2. I will say, J. Mike, he comes through in the clutch there as the tight end. He's really good at getting open kind of in the middle of the field, especially if there's zone coverage. He can really find those holes. And Kaden Anderson and him, they've got a connection. He trusts J. Mike. He trusts Durr as well, but Durr's a little bit more of that, speed guy that they're trying to get him the long ball or get him on a bubble screen, something like that. So I do see a lot of that probably happening in this game for Wyoming, not just, handing it off to your running back and hopefully he hits a hole and is able to gain 5-6 yards. I see bubble screens happening. A lot of that stuff kind of behind the line of scrimmage, trying to get the ball outside so that maybe some of the more speedy guys on the Cowboys can maybe gain some yards as well. So we mentioned kind of the run game of the Utes. I think it's the same thing on the other side. I think it's the run game of the Cowboys and how well they can do to keep this offense on the field, to allow their defense, some time to get their wind and hopefully again, Wyoming be able to score some points here and keep this sucker close. I know the betting odds I think it's around 24 points, give or take right now is the spread. And I actually think that's a fair spread, given where these 2 teams are. Games in Laramie, I was expecting it to be about a 3 to 4 touchdown spread, and it's right smack dab in the middle. But yeah, I'm with you. I think the running game of the Pokes has got to be productive in order for this game to stay kind of close and possibly have a chance for Wyoming to pull a crazy upset again here in Laramie.
Yeah, and that's what they're going to try and do. And, Kaden Anderson is still going to have to play well if you want to make that happen.
Yeah.
Where is his confidence level at going against what I do think is a pretty good Utah secondary?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I said, his first game, wasn't real happy with his game. Certainly played much better in the second, but he's coming off an injury. He got injured in the second half of the game, didn't finish the game, had some medical testing and whatnot. I believe they're saying it's an upper body, like literal body injury, not head or hand or arm or anything like that. It sounds like he's good to go. But coming out of week 1, he wasn't happy with his game. And it's not going to be easy for him to go against a Utah defense that's going to be this good. I think he is ready for this game. I know he has trust in his team, in his receivers, in his offensive line, as I talked about before. And, for him, he really hasn't made a ton of mistakes. He hasn't thrown interceptions. He's gotten the ball away when he's had to. He's looked pretty good. He doesn't like to run. I actually asked him that after game 1 because he had a couple scrambles where he did really well on. He got out of the pocket and, gained some yards, was able to get out of some sacks. And I kind of asked him about that. And he goes, I don't really necessarily like to do that, but when I have to, I will. So he's certainly not a Devin Dampier who's ready to run, whenever he needs to. So, I don't think he has an issue physically with his mobility. It's probably more, that's not really his go-to. It's certainly not his go-to. When he has to do it, he will. He'd much rather be, in the pocket throwing the ball. So we'll see what the defense can do to upset that and get him moving around a little bit more.
It will be interesting to see. And it's going to be interesting to see who ends up on top in this game. We're dropping our predictions in one moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Mazda. How great is it to have the college football season back, right? It's been great game after great game already to start the year. And Mazda makes craft cars for those who do more than simply move. I mean, whether you're trying to get to your buddy's tailgate or trying to get to the game, you want to arrive in style. And that's what Mazda can do. They deliver confidence with every ride with more IHSS top safety picks awards than anyone else. How about from footwork to breath work, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings the same intention to how we craft every model. With all-wheel drive standard in every SUV crossover, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every moment count, the impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved when you head over and get a Mazda today. Today's episode of Locked On Utes brought to you by our fantastic friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. How great is it having NFL and college football back this past weekend? And FanDuel makes sure you're ready for kickoff each and every week with can't miss offers. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I mean, I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. I mean, player props, building the same game parlay, even jumping in live game action as it unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. FanDuel has you covered. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Are you liking the Utah Utes against Texas Tech? That big noon kickoff coming up in a couple weeks. How about, do you think in the NFL, is your team going to rise up to the top? My Vikings were able to in week 1. How about you Rams, Broncos fans, wherever you are? Do you think your team is ready? You can head over to FanDuel today and get in on their offers. Before we get into our game prediction, JY, I feel good about Utah getting out of here with a win. I just think in other years I'd be more nervous about it, but I also want to explain why this Utah team, I feel like, will avoid losing to what is still a G5 team. Even if I really like Wyoming, I think they're one of those teams that naturally, if they were, like, they'd be one of the ones I think could make the leap up and consistently play against some other P4 competition. But here's the thing. I think when you're going to try and upset a P4 team, you need a P4 team that's weaker in the trenches. I think that's where, when you see the best P4 teams have that trench talent, that's just a big size and strength difference. And it's really hard to overcome that when you can't just run the ball on a team. I think where you put yourself in a position to succeed is when it's 3rd and long and maybe that opposing quarterback is just making mistakes and trying to do too much. And I don't think that's going to be the case here for Utah. When Wyoming has upset the best teams in the past, what has been their recipe for success?
Yeah, it is hanging around, keeping the game closer than a P4 team might think it should be. Again, coming in as a 3-touchdown favorite and then looking and being like, geez, it's the 4th quarter and, we're a 1-score game here, right? Like, and that can get in the psyche of some of these, teams that think they're going to come into Laramie and pull an easy win, if you will. So I think psyche's part of that. And that's why I think the first half is important for Wyoming to establish some sort of a run game and allow them to, keep that offense on the field. Sometimes I'll be straight up honest. Sometimes it's just luck. Like, you got to create your own luck. I get that. But a couple years ago, I mean, they got out of there winning the game versus Appy State, another G5 game, but they really had no business winning the game at all. I mean, Appy State was the better team. But, crazy stuff happens, and it seems like crazy stuff can happen in Laramie towards an end of a game. Again, if you keep that close, you never know what happens in the final 10 minutes. And I think that's got to be their game plan. Like, let's stay on the field. Let's keep this within striking distance. You never know what happens at 72-20, and let the game play out. And then, again, I call it luck. You kind of create your own luck. But, you got to keep it close in order for that to happen. And that's typically what you'll see up there where, teams, like, they're just not ready for it. And then when they realize they need to, like, get ready, it's too late. The Cowboys are all over them.
Jay, well, I'll ask you this before we predict the game. How
Okay.
important are these games to G5 teams? Because I look at it from last week, I talked to an expert for an FCS team, and he talked about the amount of money that they get out of this and how it literally changes everything for their program. Because we do hear some coaches talking about, I want to only play P4 teams moving forward. Why are these games important for G5 teams?
Well, I think they're important, not just for the team, but I think they're important for the G5 or the G6, as we've been calling it now with the pack. And I think it's even more important now as we're into a 12 team, maybe 14, 16, whatever team playoff, to better be able to rank teams. Because, if we're only taking one G6 team into the college football playoffs, which is going to be typical here pretty much every year, with them not necessarily playing each other, you've got to look at strength of schedule. Like the top of the P4, that's all they ever want to talk about is strength of schedule this, strength of schedule that. The same thing can be said for the group of 6. Like you've got to look at strength of schedule, because if you have an 11-1 American team and an 11-1 Mountain West team and an 11-1 Pac team, like you got to look at out of conference at that point and say, okay, who matched up against who and who had the bigger wins. And you look at USF right now. I mean, they're the poster boy right now for why these games are so important. Preseason, everybody's ranking Boise, as were we. Oh, they're the sure in again. USF beats them in week 1. Well, then USF goes and beats Florida in week 2, and now they got Miami going. So I think that's why it's so important. You're seeing it with USF right now. And even UNLV, they just had a win against UCLA. I know everybody will say, oh, UCLA's, they're the bottom half of the Big Ten. They're not that good of a team right now. Be that as it may, the G6 team just beat fairly easily. The second half got a little funky, fairly easily a power team there. And it helps strengthen their schedule, again, to get into that CFP. And I think the only way you can do that is to play and perform well against P4 teams. Look at UNLV last year. To me, they beat Kansas. They should have beaten Syracuse. And again, that's how they made their mark early in the season. Of course, they lost to Boise, but that's how, teams get national recognition like USF is getting this year, because they're beating these Power 4 high-level teams.
I totally agree. And I think, unfortunately, getting to our predictions for Wyoming, they're playing a high-level Power 4 team.
Oh, yeah.
I agree with your coach. I think Utah is a top 10 team in the country. I do think they take care of business this weekend. I think the difference is the talent in the trenches. I don't think the run game gets going for Wyoming. It's there for Utah. I think this Utah offense continues to get in sync, and it's a really good tune-up game for Utah, as they will be seeing Texas Tech the week after. Their full focus, though, will be on Wyoming. They will be locked in Laramie. I think Utah is going to win this one 47-13. How do you see it, JY?
Yeah, well, I agree with everything you said there. I think it's going to be won by the trenches, or in the trenches, and your lines are incredible on both sides of the ball. I think you are right around top 10 football team, and I'm anxious to watch the Utes. It's a team we do picks every Wednesday. I pick all the Mountain West teams. I often try to pick the Utes because I enjoy watching you guys. I enjoy picking your games because they're fun games to watch and pick. I'm not going to give you a score prediction. We actually do a pick episodes. I'll let people come to our channel if they want to see my exact prediction. But I think your read of the game is spot on. That your read is my read. So I won't repeat everything you said. I agree with you.
JY, I really appreciate you making the time, man. Please let everyone know where they can find your stuff at.
Yeah, I mean, we're on YouTube. You can check us out there. I'm on X. I get a little crazy sometimes on X. I try to keep it under control. You can find us on Spotify, but it's usually delayed posts and stuff. So if you want to see all of our stuff, we do live episodes Wednesday nights. Pick the Mountain West, pick the Big Ten, have a heck of a lot of fun. You can find us on YouTube.
Awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much again, JY.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you tomorrow predicting which Utah players could be in for big days in Laramie.